Okay. You don't need devs to do DevOps. So I'm Anders Bruvik. I work as an infrastructure engineer, and I'm not a developer, as you might have guessed. I also organize a couple of DevOps days. So I'm going to talk about how we can apply DevOps practices when we are working in an infrastructure team. But first I'm going to try to explain what DevOps is. And it's not that easy to explain because everyone tends to have their own definition of DevOps. So I'll start with telling you what it's not. So is there anyone here who has the title DevOps engineer as their job title? Well, sorry, you've been fooled. It's is there anyone who have a DevOps team in their organization? Sorry, it doesn't exist. Actually, there's a lot of things that DevOps is not. It's not a product. It's not something you can hire. It's not a department. I asked a question on Twitter, and I got a lot of different and some funny answers. It's not something that anyone understands. So my definition of DevOps, it's something you do. I want to share this definition from Ken McGrath. DevOps, it's a culture where people, regardless of title or background, work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. And when you start to talk about DevOps as verbs instead of as thing, it starts to make more sense to talk about DevOps when we are in an infrastructure team, because after all, we are developing our infrastructure or storage clusters. So if it becomes developing and operating, it makes more sense. So, and this definition, it's from John Willis, and there's a great blog post you can read. So, what is this thing we do when we do DevOps? I would say the most important practice is to make pipelines. And what is pipelines? It's what takes our configuration from version control into production. So we have version control, and we have something that automatically brings it into production. And why do you want to do that? Well, that's probably another talk, but trust me, if we automate the changes from version control to production, we have lower risk, shorter time to market, happier employees, and we free up time to work on useful stuff. And what is the main purpose of a pipeline? It's actually to, if we treat all configuration changes as something we could possibly put into production, the main purpose of the pipeline is to take away all changes that is not fit for production. So it's about testing. And when we test systems, this is the way we usually do it. So we spend a lot of time doing time-consuming, expensive manual tests. So what we usually do is we build the complete system, we design it and set it up, and then we start to do some like manual tests after it's built. So what we should do instead is turn that pyramid upside, or actually not upside down, the right way. And instead of doing a lot of manual tests, we should spend time writing smaller unit tests that we can run automatically on small parts of the infrastructure. And from there, when those tests have succeeded, we can go on and do only a few like high-level tests on the whole system. And how do we do that on hardware? Well, testing on hardware is expensive because you actually need to have the hardware there. So what we need to do is to break the system down into small pieces, immutable pieces that we can test individually, and make it possible to redeploy each piece of the system. We need to separate config and data, and we need to do unit tests on individual parts. And there's been some great talks today about how to deploy Ceph and containerize stuff and use config management for deploy and so on. And identify the parts you have to run on real hardware and keep hardware for testing for those parts, so you can actually run the hardware tests on the hardware you're going to deploy on in production. And if you want to improve something, you have to measure it, so monitoring is important. That's all I had time to talk about that. What have we learned? DevOps is not about developers or operators, but it's about culture and practices, and that can be applied everywhere, even if we are only operators or infrastructure engineers or whatever. And most important, make it easy to do changes in production in a safe way by implementing pipelines and automated testing. And why are we working with infrastructure? Because building stuff is fun. So that's what I was going to say. Thank you.